My stepmother slammed her shoulder into me so hard the entire Thanksgiving table jolted, and the $2 million trust folder was ripped straight out of my hands before I could even react. The force pushed my chair back, the legs screeching on the hardwood, and a sharp sting shot up my arm as the edge of the folder scraped across my skin. My face flushed red from the impact. The room went silent. Every fork froze mid-air. The muted football game flickered in the background while I sat there holding my stinging hand, trying to understand how my own family had just watched this happen without a single word. Carla did not even look at me when she snapped, "Move, Blair. You crunch numbers. This is real money. Madison actually builds things." Her voice cut through the room like it belonged to her. She shoved the folder against her chest protectively and continued as if the hit had been nothing more than shifting a chair. I was 26. I did not need a trust. Her daughter did. I felt the heat crawl up my neck into my cheeks. I was too shocked to speak. I saw the flash of discomfort pass across my dad David's face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. He lowered his eyes to his plate like he was pretending not to be a witness. That was somehow worse than Carla hitting me. Carla opened the folder right in front of me, blocking my attempt to reach for it with the back of her hand, which she shoved into mine harder than necessary. The cardboard corner slammed into my knuckles, and a strip of pink appeared instantly across my skin. "Sign it. You will be fine. You have a job." She does not. She said it with the kind of confidence only a person who has never faced consequences can use. A few relatives gave each other awkward looks, but no one spoke. The humiliation landed heavier than her shoulder. I forced myself not to pull my hand away and not to cry. I looked down as the pages shifted, and for one brief second, the document tilted enough for me to see the first page of the trust clearly. Harbor Ridge Trust. Primary beneficiary. My full name printed in clean black type. Before Carla snapped the folder shut again, I memorized the line. My grandfather had put my name there. Carla was acting like she owned the right to erase it. And the way she kept repeating that I would be fine made something click inside me. Because she believed it. I was the one in the family who always landed on my feet. The responsible one. The easy one to take from. The one who would not fight back at the dinner table. She was counting on that. What she did not know was that my entire job in Seattle depended on seeing details other people missed. I managed data models for apartment deals worth $80 to $100 million. I once caught a mistake in 2 lines of a $60 million acquisition that saved my firm from a financial disaster. But at this table, I was being treated like a child with no understanding of the thing that was legally mine. Carla kept talking about fairness and sacrifice, and how families support the member who is struggling. Each sentence rewrote the story into one, where I was selfish for even touching the folder. Madison sat at the far end, chewing slowly, pretending not to notice the bruising rising on my shoulder. I watched my dad glance at Carla, then at me, then back to his plate. He made no move, no defense. No, you cannot hit my daughter. No, that trust is not yours to take. His silence was a second blow, a deeper one. It was then that anger finally pushed through my humiliation. Not rage, not heat. Something colder, more focused. Because while Carla was shoving the papers around, I had already spotted what she did not understand. The date format, the notary stamp placement, the thickness of the amended pages behind the original. Details I read every day for a living. Details she assumed no one in this family would ever think to question. When dinner ended, I excused myself early. My shoulder throbbed every time I shifted in the car on the drive back to my Seattle apartment. The bruise was blooming and a red scrape lined my knuckles where the folder had hit. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every second at the table. The words, the hit, the silence, and the look on my dad's face when he let it happen. Around midnight, the pain in my shoulder flared when I rolled over, and it jolted a different instinct in me, one I had ignored for years. I grabbed my phone, opened the photo album, and tapped on the few pictures I had taken earlier of the trust documents almost by accident while helping set the table. I zoomed in on the signature block, then the date, then the notary seal, then the location line. Each detail sharpened like pieces of a puzzle Carla had assumed was too complicated for me to solve. She was wrong, very wrong. And as I lay there, bruised, humiliated, and wide awake, I realized that this was no longer about Thanksgiving or disrespect, or even the hit at the table. This was about something bigger, something my grandfather trusted me to protect, and something Carla was willing to cross the line to steal. That moment, the cold focus settled into place. This was not a sad family story anymore. This was a justice story. If you have ever been the responsible one, the one everyone assumed would be fine, the one they expected to give up what was yours because you would survive anyway, stay with me. You may discover you have more power than they ever counted on. I spend most of my week inside a glass building in downtown Seattle, where my days revolve around data models and projected returns and vacancy rates. By 9 in the morning, the elevators open into our floor, and the lights hum steadily over rows of monitors. I slide into my desk and pull up spreadsheets that will decide whether our firm buys or rejects entire apartment complexes. Bang ngai. I decide the future of buildings with 120 units. Boy toy. I am still called the 26-year-old kid who does not understand money. That contrast has always sat strangely in my gut, but a few months before Thanksgiving, I still believed I could keep my work life and my family life separate if I just stayed quiet. At the office, my team leans on me. I run cash flow projections for deals between $40 and $80 million. I calculate cap rates while my coffee cools beside me. I catch mismatches in rent rolls and maintenance schedules without even meaning to. My manager, Michael, often stops by my desk just to say "Good catch, Blair," and every time he says it, I feel both a little proud and a little embarrassed because I am not someone who likes the spotlight. I prefer to sit in the back row during presentations, even when I know my analysis is the reason the deal exists at all. A month or so before Thanksgiving, I took a FaceTime call from my dad between meetings. He and Carla sat on their porch in Bellevue, drinking something warm while the fall wind rattled the trees behind them. Carla leaned into the screen and smiled in that tone she always used when she wanted to guide the narrative. "Honey, you are doing great. That is why you do not need the safety net. Madison is still trying to find her path." I felt my jaw tighten a little as I listened because she said it like a compliment. In her mind, I was the strong one, the responsible one, the one who should give up support because support was for weaker people. That meant that anything coming from my grandfather or anything financial that touched the word family was always framed as something I did not need. A kid who is fine does not need help. A woman with a job can step aside. It was not said cruelly. It was said matter of fact, like gravity. I held the phone steady and nodded because arguing with her never changed anything. Dad watched the call but did not speak much. He rarely contradicted Carla, and I learned long ago to lower my expectations. I ended the call and stepped back into the office where our senior partner had just emailed the team. He singled out my work on a previous project, saying that my recommendation had guided the final decision. It was a short email, but my heart thumped harder, reading it than it ever had, hearing Carla say she was proud of me. At work, I keep quiet about the fact that I have my own investments. Years of handling real estate data taught me to put money early into index funds and a few all-right positions. My accounts crossed 6 figures earlier that year, but I never told my family. They already assumed I was the one who did not need help. If anything, they would have used this as more proof that whatever extra they had should go to Madison. I rarely volunteer anything about my life that could be used that way, so I kept it quiet. People at the firm trusted me. They handed me pitch decks that were worth millions and asked me to review sensitive financials before investor meetings. There is a reason I have a habit of photographing documents. Sometimes it is to remember a pagination error or a line that needs adjusting. Sometimes it is to revisit a small inconsistency without dragging the whole deck home. It It is a harmless habit in my field, but it would later explain why I had images of the Harbor Ridge Trust already saved on my phone before Carla came after me at that Thanksgiving table. At work, the praise sometimes made me uncomfortable, not because I doubted myself, but because in my family, no one had ever made space for my accomplishments. When Michael told the team that my input changed the projected return for a Tacoma acquisition, I felt a flush of pride, but also a strange ache. I never heard anything similar at home. If anything, my successes made Carla lean further into her story that I did not need anything. Meanwhile, at home, the messages I received told an entirely different story. Carla sent a text one afternoon while I was calculating pro forma expenses. It said, "Madison is meeting with a potential investor. Fingers crossed." A line later, she added, "You do not have to worry about money like she does." I stared at the text and then locked my phone. The words were casual, but the message was clear. I was fixed in their minds as the one who had enough. Madison was the one who deserved more. In quiet moments when I reviewed property data, I would occasionally think about my dad, the way he rarely stood up for me, the way he often acted like staying neutral was the same as being fair. It never was. Fairness takes courage. Neutrality takes nothing at all. Some evenings, I sat by my apartment window overlooking the Seattle lights and wondered if he realized how distant our relationship had become. Value moments slipped through each part of my day. I would be modeling a deal in Cap Hill and catch myself explaining in my head how to tell if a building was overvalued. I would scan a rent roll and whisper a rule of thumb to myself about vacancy allowances. Each time I did it, I thought about how easily $2 million could vanish if handled by people who did not understand numbers. And that contrast made me feel uneasy because I knew exactly how much competence mattered. 2 or 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Dad called again. His voice was warm the way it gets before holidays. He said Carla wanted everyone home early this year. She wanted to talk about the future of my grandfather's trust. He said it like it was an invitation to a family discussion, but something in the back of my mind tightened. Carla wanted to talk about the future of the trust never meant debate. It meant decision. And I knew whatever was waiting for me in Bellevue was not just a holiday meal. As I ended the call, I stared for a long moment at the skyline outside my apartment, thinking about what that meeting would really be. None of us knew it would become a line I could never uncross. Driving into Bellevue a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving always feels like crossing an invisible line. Downtown Seattle is glass and steel and traffic noise and cranes on the skyline. Bellevue is wide streets and trimmed hedges and big houses with 3 car garages and perfect lawns. My dad and Carla live in one of those houses on a quiet cul-de-sac, a 2-story place with pale siding and a porch swing that looks like it came from a catalog. I pulled into their driveway on a gray afternoon and cut the engine, watching a couple of kids ride bikes in circles down the street. It was peaceful in a way that never quite fit me. As soon as I opened the front door, I could smell something buttery from the kitchen and hear Carla talking loudly about something that sounded like branding and investors. "Blair is here," my dad called out from the living room. He got up from his recliner and hugged me in a quick, distracted way, already glancing past me toward the kitchen like he was afraid of missing a cue. Carla appeared with a dish towel over her shoulder, smile wide, and Madison followed a second later, glossy hair and perfect makeup even for a casual night in. We all sat in the living room with coffee and snacks, and within minutes the conversation shifted to Madison's latest startup idea. She described it with animated hands, talking about a wellness brand and social media campaigns and a subscription model. Carla beamed at her. "She is the real entrepreneur in the family," Carla said proudly. "People like Madison create things." I felt the words land like a soft slap. No one asked about the deal I was modeling that week or the presentation I had just finished. I was nudged into the comfortable role of listener, nodding in the right places. When Madison paused, Carla added in that tone she uses when she thinks she is balancing the scales. "Blair is good with spreadsheets. Madison is good with people." The sentence was light and joking on the surface, but it locked me into a box I knew too well. The office girl. The quiet one who pushes numbers around but does not live in the real world. I let out a small laugh to keep the air from going awkward and then changed the subject to the weather. Later that evening, my dad asked if I could help him with the printer in his small home office. The room was a mix of old and new paper files stacked on a wooden credenza next to a newer monitor and a too loud laser printer. As I crouched beside his desk fiddling with the cable, his email inbox was open on the screen. I was not trying to snoop, but one subject line caught my eye. It was an old email from my grandfather from years before he died. The preview line showed the first sentence. "You always had the sharpest mind in the room, kiddo." Even from the floor, I could see my own name in the address line. For a second, I just stared at it. I remembered the email the way he used to pull me aside at family gatherings and ask what I thought about things, not in a condescending way, but as if my opinion actually mattered. We'd been close in a way that Carla and Madison never were. I swallowed and looked away, pretending I had not seen it, but the reminder settled over me like a quiet weight. As I reached up to restart the printer, my fingers brushed a stack of folders on the corner of the desk. One of them had a dark blue cover with a familiar bank logo embossed on the front and the words Harbor Ridge Trust printed across the top in silver. Below that, in smaller text, it said $2 million and the name of an estate planning firm with a downtown Seattle address. A year line near the bottom read something like 2016, around the time my grandfather had finally sold the small lakeside cabin he used to own out near a place he always called Harbor Ridge. He had joked once that he turned the dock and canoe into something more useful. Apparently, this was it. I froze for a moment, my heart beating a little faster. The trust was real. It had a number. It had a bank. It had a firm. I tilted the folder just enough to see the full title. Harbor Ridge was right there in clear print, the same name he had given to the cabin we used to visit when I was a kid. That place had been all peeling paint and cold lake water and warm pancakes, and now it existed as a financial instrument sitting on my dad's desk. I did not open the folder, but my phone was in my back pocket, and my habit kicked in before I thought about it. While my dad bent under the desk to check an outlet, I slipped the phone out, angled it, and snapped a quick photo of the folder cover. Just the outside. Logo, bank name, estate firm year. One picture. Then I slid the phone away and adjusted the stack so nothing looked disturbed. It was reflex the same way I might capture a title page at work to reference later. As I walked back into the hallway, I heard Carla in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice was low but firm the way she sounds when she is talking to customer service and expects them to bend. "Yes, I am calling about the Harbor Ridge Trust," she said. "We want to update some information. Yes, I know he passed. That is why we need to handle the successor trustee piece." She paused, listening, then continued. "My husband is the trustee now. We just want to make sure the paperwork reflects the current needs of the family." The phrase "current needs" made my stomach twist a little. I stood just out of sight by the wall, not wanting her to see me listening. Successor trustee. Update. Needs of the family. None of that sounded like a casual question. It sounded like movement. Later that night, I dragged my old suitcase up to my old bedroom. The room technically looked the same. Same twin bed, same bookshelf, same faded poster still taped to the closet door. But it felt different. The guest blankets were folded precisely. A small basket of travel-size shampoo and lotion sat on the dresser like something from a hotel. I was welcome there, but I did not belong. I was both daughter and guest, and that in-between feeling pressed down on me as I sat on the edge of the bed. Part of me was glad to sleep in the familiar space. Part of me felt like I had to ask permission to open my own closet. I thought about the folder on the desk and about Carla's phone call, but I did not mention either when we gathered for tea. I could already hear how it would sound if I did. Paranoid, greedy, worried about money she did not need. So I stayed quiet and let Carla talk about grocery lists and guest counts. "You do not have to worry about money like the rest of us," she said at one point when my dad sighed about property taxes. It was a simple sentence, but it told me exactly where I stood. the one who worries about spreadsheets, not about trusts, the one who does not need protecting. After everyone went to bed, I went downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dim and still the only light coming from under the office door. I pushed it open gently and saw the trash bin beside the desk was full of shredded envelopes and crumpled paper. On top of the pile lay a photocopy of what looked like a page from the trust. It had a few lines of text and names listed. One name had been circled with yellow highlighter, Madison. The neon ring around her name glowed faintly, even in the low light. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart giving one hard thump. Hard. Then I turned the light off and went back upstairs, understanding for the first time that Carla was not just talking about updating paperwork. She was preparing to move my grandfather's intentions line by line into her daughter's hands. The next night, I stayed one more evening in Bellevue, partly because Dad seemed genuinely happy to have me there, and partly because I wanted to see if anything else about the trust would surface. The house settled into its usual quiet pattern after dinner. Carla loaded the dishwasher with the kind of efficient clatter that always sounded slightly irritated. Madison disappeared into the guest room she used as an office, talking loudly on speakerphone about brand strategy. Dad watched the end of some crime show and then yawned and went upstairs. By 10:30, the main lights were off and only a small lamp in the hallway glowed. I could not sleep right away, so I wandered downstairs for water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed a soft strip of light under the door of my dad's office. It was open a crack. I nudged it wider with my foot and found the desk lamp on and the Harbor Ridge Trust folder spread open, like someone had stepped out for a moment and forgotten to close it. The sight made my pulse jump. Documents were fanned out across the desk, some clipped together, some loose. On top lay a set of pages labeled Amendment. I moved closer, drawn in the way I am drawn to a spreadsheet with a number that does not fit. My grandfather's signature was at the bottom of one of the amendment pages, except the loops and angles were not quite right. I stared at it for a long second. I had seen his handwriting on birthday checks and postcards, and that email he wrote, calling me the sharpest mind in the room. This version of his name looked stiffer, like someone had traced it while concentrating too hard. Then my eyes moved to the date beside it and my stomach dropped. The signature line was dated 2 weeks after the day he died. I remembered the date clearly because I was on a bus from Seattle to attend the small memorial at that same house. He'd been gone for days by then. There was no way he could have signed anything. That single detail glowed red in my brain. It was not just unfair, it was impossible. While I was processing it, I heard muffled voices in the hallway and then closer. Carla's voice came first low and dismissive. "It is just paperwork. Blair will not care." Another voice that sounded like my dad answered something I did not catch. Carla cut him off gently but firmly. "She is young. She will land on her feet. Madison needs this now." That sentence slid through me like ice. It was exactly the logic I had always felt under the surface finally spoken out loud. I was the one who could absorb a loss because I would somehow be fine. Madison was the one who needed saving, even if the price of saving her was rewriting the last legal decisions of a dead man. I backed up into the darker side of the office where the shelves were hoping they would not come all the way in. Their footsteps stopped just outside the door. Dad mumbled something about feeling strange about the dates. Carla sighed. "You are overthinking this. The attorney said everything is in order. Blair is too busy with her little job to manage real family money." That one hit me harder than I expected. My little job. The job that sees more money in a month than this house would in a year. The job that made me the easiest person in this entire equation to steal from because they assumed I did not care. The comment burned enough to push my hand toward my phone. They moved away down the hall a moment later, their voices fading. I exhaled slowly and turned back to the desk. Detective mode is second nature for me. I slipped my phone out, opened the camera, and took a clear photo of the entire amendment page. Then another closer on the signature block. Then another on the date. Then one more focused on the notary stamp in the corner with its state and county, and a notary identification number etched inside an oval. I zoomed in on the tiny certificate number, saying it silently to myself until it stuck. I flipped gently to the original trust summary and scanned it quickly, memorizing and capturing what I could without disturbing the order. This time, the details were not abstract. The Harbor Ridge Trust was not just a line with $2 million beside it. The breakdown listed a portfolio of municipal bonds tied to city projects in the region, a small lake house property described as a vacation cabin, and a cash account holding around $400,000. I could picture the cabin a version of my grandfather's old place, but likely renovated by whoever bought the original. The municipal bonds were the kind of safe holdings someone like him would have chosen. The cash was probably the leftover from the sale of the cabin and other assets. Every line had weight. This was money with history behind it, not numbers on a screen for a stranger. I photographed the summary page too careful to capture the composition. Bonds property cash, $2 million in total, enough to change a life, enough to tempt someone who believed the end justified their method. As I stood there with my phone warm in my hand, a part of me wanted to march upstairs and wave the amendment in front of my dad and ask him if he really believed his father signed a document 2 weeks after his own funeral. But another part of me knew exactly how that conversation would go. Carla would call it a misunderstanding. She would say I was reading too much into a date. She would say I was making it about me. She would twist it until my concern sounded like greed. I backed away from the desk and sank into my dad's swivel chair instead, the leather creaking softly. The office felt too small for all the thoughts in my head. If I speak up, they will call me selfish. If I stay quiet, I am handing $2 million to someone willing to lie. The conflict pressed into my ribs. It did not feel like a choice between money and no money. It felt like a choice between allowing my grandfather's intentions to stand or allowing someone else to write over them. I did not pick up the pages again, but I did pull out my phone and open a browser. I typed in the notary identification number and state printed on the stamp. Public records are not just for my day job. Within seconds, a listing came up. The registered notary with that number was based in Tacoma, not Bellevue, and their commission dates did not line up cleanly with the date on the amendment. The location listed for the signing on the document was the house address in Bellevue, but the notary's usual operating location was miles away. None of that proved anything on its own, but the mismatch was another thread. My heart beat faster. An amendment dated after death. A notary stamp that did not quite fit the when and where. A signature that looked almost but not quite like the man who taught me how to balance a checkbook at his kitchen table. Everything about it felt wrong. I turned off the screen and sat there in the half-light, listening to the refrigerator hum down the hall. The thought loop would not quiet. If I confront them now, everything explodes. If I wait and gather more, I risk the paperwork going through. I rub my temples and close my eyes. They will say I do not need it. They will say I have my job and my own accounts, that I am tearing the family apart over money. But the truth was louder than their possible lines. I live my life by numbers and dates and signatures. I know what it looks like when something has been doctored. That knowledge was both a burden and a weapon. Eventually, I stood up, turned off the desk lamp, and stepped out of the office, leaving the folder arranged the way I had found it. Early the next morning, I told Carla and my dad that I needed to get back to Seattle sooner than planned. I blamed work, deadlines, a model that could not wait. They accepted it easily because it fit the role they had written for me, the girl with the little job who always had something going on. I packed my bag in my old room, taking one last look at the bookshelf and the framed photo of my grandfather smiling in front of the original Harbor Ridge cabin. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket with the photos of the trust and the amendment tucked safely inside. I walked out of that house quietly but not empty-handed. I chose to retreat from the scene before the real fight began. They thought my leaving meant I did not care. What they had forgotten was that I make my living by reading the numbers other people hope no one notices. Thanksgiving Day felt like it was wrapped in a kind of staged warmth that did not quite reach the corners. The house in Bellevue was fuller than usual. Cars lined the curb outside, cousins and aunts and a couple of neighbors drifting in with pies and bottles and that forced cheer people bring to holiday gatherings where old tensions sit just under the surface. The smells of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes and cinnamon drifted through the rooms. Football murmured from the living room television. Kids thumped up and down the hallway upstairs. Carla moved through it all like a director setting a stage, adjusting place settings, straightening napkins, touching people on the arm as she passed, smiling with her teeth and checking her reflection in the glass cabinet doors. The long dining table in the front room had been extended with all the leaves and covered with a cream-colored cloth. Name cards sat at each plate. I was placed halfway down on one side between an aunt who talked too loud and a cousin who spent most of his time scrolling on his phone. Madison sat near the head of the table on the opposite side in prime view. Dad was at the head. Carla took the spot at his right, close enough to tap his hand whenever she wanted to steer him. As everyone settled, glasses were filled, and there was the usual Thanksgiving shuffle of chairs against wood. For a while, the conversation was light. People compared cooking disasters from past years, joked about the team that was losing on TV. Madison talked about her business to a neighbor using phrases like scaling and customer acquisition. Carla watched her proudly. My bruise from the earlier visit had faded by then, but a memory of standing in that office staring at the impossible date on the amendment sat with me, heavier than any scar. I watched Carla out of the corner of my eye and waited for the other shoe to drop because I knew this dinner was not just a meal. Once plates were loaded and the first round of eating quieted everyone down, Carla cleared her throat with a polite little sound and rested her hand on my dad's forearm. The table conversation dimmed around her automatically. She rose just enough in her chair to be seen by everyone and gave a modest smile. "We have decided what to do with Grandpa's trust," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. The phrasing made my jaw clench. We. Not my grandfather who had created it. Not even my dad alone as trustee. We as in the second wife and the man who would not look too closely at dates on documents. Chairs shifted as people turned toward her. I felt very distinctly the sensation of being shifted from the role of daughter and beneficiary to an audience member. I was not part of the we. I was one of the people being informed. The level of disrespect in that small difference hit almost harder than what came next. Carla continued in a tone that tried to sound humble and responsible. "We have talked a lot about what is best for the family. We want to honor your father's memory," she said to my dad, squeezing his arm, "and we also want to be practical." Then she looked down the table toward me and smiled the way someone smiles at a child who is about to be told they cannot sit at the adult table anymore. "Blair is fine. She is single, no kids, great job. Madison is struggling. That money will actually help her. I could feel eyes on me taking in the description, the story being built around me. The responsible one. The one who can be cut out cleanly because the numbers say she will be okay." The words sounded reasonable enough on the surface, which is what made them dangerous. Normalized abuse rarely sounds like shouting. It sounds like fairness. It sounds like we are doing what is best. I set my fork down before I dropped it and gripped the edge of my napkin under the table. Carla looked around, building her case. "We believe," she said, "that the fairest thing to do is to reassign the trust to the person who truly needs it right now. It will keep Madison's business afloat and give her a real chance." There it was, a public sentence turning my grandfather's careful planning into a lifeline for a company he had never heard of. I felt my heart beating in my throat. When she reached for the dark blue folder sitting beside my dad's plate, my body reacted at the same time as my mind. I pushed my chair back slightly and reached out without thinking. My fingers brushed the cardboard just as her hand did. In that instant, something in Carla snapped from polite explanation to physical enforcement. She shoved her chair sideways and her shoulder slammed into my upper arm hard enough that my chair jolted. The legs screeched and skidded. My glass of wine tipped red liquid spilling over the edge and streaking across the cream cloth in a spreading stain. Pain shot from my shoulder down my side, and the world narrowed for a second to the impact and the shock. Heat flooded my face. A few people gasped. Utensils stopped mid-air. No one stood up. "Move, Blair," she snapped, as if I had stepped into her path on purpose. "You crunch numbers? This is real money. Madison actually builds things." Her voice dripped with a kind of contempt, dressed as practicality. My hand was still extended when she swatted it aside. The edge of the folder cracked against the back of my hand, a sharp sting blooming across my skin. I watched a red mark appear almost instantly. My face burned, but not just from physical pain. It was the humiliation, the knowledge that my body had just been used as an obstacle, to be removed in full view of people who share my blood, and not one person had raised their voice. Carla held the folder to her chest like a prize and opened it with a flick of her fingers. Pages rustled. I glimpsed the familiar heading, Harbor Ridge Trust, before the contents were angled away from me. She did not lower her voice. "The trust will be reassigned so Madison can keep her business afloat," she announced, looking down the table, as if seeking nods. It was a clear threat to the asset and an equally clear announcement that my input did not matter. I saw my dad's eyes flick to mine, then away to his plate. He did not say stop. He did not say, "Do not hit her." He did not say, "This is not your decision to make." The avoidance in his gaze hurt more deeply than the bruise rising on my shoulder. I swallowed hard and forced my jaw to unclench. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, but something inside me began to cool rather than boil. If I exploded now, I would be cast as emotional and greedy the story Carla had prepared for. "You can make your own $2 million, Blair," she said almost lightly, as if that made this fair. "She cannot." The line was meant to sound flattering. It only underlined how little she respected my claim. To her, my capacity to stand on my own meant my grandfather's gift was open for redistribution to someone she favored. The pain in my shoulder pulsed. The skin on the back of my hand throbbed where the folder had hit. I forced myself to sit up straighter, even as my body wanted to curl in. The room felt too hot. My throat felt tight, like I had swallowed something sharp. I looked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each person who would meet my gaze. A few dropped their eyes. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Madison stared at her plate face, carefully neutral. I heard my own voice before I had fully decided to speak. "Are you sure you want everyone here to witness this?" The words came out calm, almost conversational, but there was something underneath them. Carla blinked, thrown for half a second. Then her mouth tightened. "This is about what is fair," she said. "We are not doing anything wrong. We are just making an adjustment that reflects reality." I felt something lock into place inside me. Reality had dates and signatures and notary stamps. Reality had numbers that did not move just because someone wanted them to. Reality was not something Carla got to redraw in front of an audience without being challenged. My instinct to keep the peace wrestled with my instinct to protect what I knew to be mine. The first one lost. I took a breath and let my voice stay low. "Okay," I said. "If it is really about what is fair, we will do this the fair way." A few people glanced between us, sensing a line had been drawn, even if they did not know where it led yet. Carla frowned, but before she could answer, my dad muttered something about the food getting cold, and someone cracked a nervous joke about the game on the television. The conversation lurched back into motion, shaky and forced, but the air in the room had changed. My shoulder ached every time I lifted my fork. I stayed quiet through the rest of the meal, storing every word, every glance, every detail. They thought I was swallowing my pride to keep from ruining Thanksgiving. What I was really doing was choosing the battleground. When I got back to Seattle that night, my shoulder was still aching from where Carla had slammed into me, and the back of my hand throbbed from the sting of the folder edge. The cold air outside helped a little, but once I stepped into my apartment, the weight of everything settled again. I dropped my coat on the chair, turned on the single warm lamp by the kitchen counter, and sat down with my laptop. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the photo album on my phone. Each picture of the trust document stared back at me in perfect clarity. I zoomed in on the amendment page first, the one Carla had flashed in front of me long enough for me to catch the heading. The date bothered me most. I already knew it was after my grandfather passed, but seeing the handwritten numbers again made something in my stomach twist. My training taught me to question inconsistencies, and now that instinct took over. I enlarged the notary stamp and froze when I saw the listed location: Tacoma, 50 miles from Bellevue. Yet the amendment stated it was signed at home in Bellevue. I leaned back in my chair, hearing my pulse in my ears, not from fear anymore, but from the first spark of certainty that something was very wrong on paper, not just in behavior. I had barely processed the mismatch when my phone vibrated. A message from Carla lit up the screen. "I hope you understand. You are strong, she is not." My chest tightened. It was the same moral framing she always used, a kind of gentle cruelty wrapped in concern. Gaslighting dressed as kindness. It pushed responsibility onto me to be the bigger person, the uncomplaining daughter, while she took whatever she wanted. I put the phone face down. I refused to answer. Instead, I opened a browser tab and began to work the way I would on any complex deal. No emotion, just facts. No noise, just numbers. I went straight to the Washington State Notary Registry and typed in the notary identification number from the stamp. A profile appeared showing the notary was registered to an address in Tacoma and had logged appointments across Pierce County on the day in question. No listing for Bellevue. None. I checked again, cross-referencing dates, times, and available logs. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. This amendment could not have been signed where they claimed. Next, I searched hospital records and old family messages to confirm the timeline of my grandfather's health. I knew he had been very sick near the end, but the notes from that month told an even clearer story. He had been bedridden under hospice-level care the entire period. This document was supposedly drafted, executed, and notarized. He would not have been traveling anywhere, let alone meeting a notary in Tacoma or Bellevue. I felt a cold steadiness settle inside me as the picture grew sharper. They thought I would never check. They thought I would accept the story they fed me about being young and capable enough to give up what was mine. I opened another tab and pulled up one of the summaries of the trust components that I had saved from earlier conversations with my grandfather. The $2 million was not just a number. It was structured and deliberate. It included a portfolio of municipal bonds, stable, long-term, low risk, a small lake cabin he had renovated the summer before he got sick, and a cash account just under $400,000 for maintenance taxes and emergency needs. It was not imaginary money or something that could be hand-waved away into a struggling business. It was wealth carefully built and protected by someone who believed it should go to me. My hand steadied as I created a new folder on my computer titled Harbor Ridge Personal. I dragged every photo into it and then opened a blank document. I began typing the timeline: the date of the original trust, the date of the proposed amendment, the date of my grandfather's passing. The notary appointment logs the discrepancies in location. It felt clinical, almost like preparing an internal case review for a partner at work. And maybe that was why I could do it. My emotions were swirling underneath, but the structure kept me from drowning in them. Still, every few minutes, a flash of that Thanksgiving moment broke through. The memory of Carla's shoulder slamming into mine, the surprised gasps around the table, the heat rising in my face, whether from physical impact or humiliation, I was not even sure anymore. My hand smarting from the folder strike. My father's eyes looking away. Those images played in my mind like a loop, reminding me what silence had cost me before, and why I could not be silent now. As I worked, I noticed something else in the amendment: my father's signature. Except the usually steady lines looked uneven, slightly shaky, as if he had been pressured or stressed when he signed. It hit me harder than I expected. He had gone along with this, even if reluctantly. My breath caught as I typed that observation into the timeline. It felt like betrayal all over again. I sat back and admitted something to myself that I had never said aloud. I had gone my entire adult life avoiding conflict with Carla because saying no to her always felt dangerous, not physically, but emotionally. She wielded guilt like a tool, and I had given in each time to keep the peace for my dad. But this was the line. This was the moment I could not keep protecting her comfort at the cost of my own inheritance and my own dignity. By the time I finished the first draft of the evidence file, my pulse had finally steadied. I looked at the folder glowing on my desktop and felt the shift inside me, the one I had been resisting for years. I could handle multi-million-dollar analyses for work. I could handle this, too. I closed the laptop, pulled my sore arm gently across my chest, and whispered into the quiet room that if Carla wanted this to be paperwork, I would bring her paperwork of my own, the kind that carried weight she could not manipulate with charm or intimidation. And then the thought formed with total clarity. I needed a lawyer, a real one, someone who could turn these numbers into action. I opened my phone again this time, not to read Carla's message, but to search for estate attorneys in Seattle. The words came easily into my mind and set like stone. If she wanted to twist documents, I would bring the law. If she wanted to turn this into a negotiation, I would turn it into a case. If she wanted to pretend this was a small misunderstanding, I would show her exactly what a data analyst who refuses to be pushed out of her seat can do. This is not paperwork anymore, I murmured. This is legal work. I woke up the next morning with a stiffness in my shoulder that reminded me of every second Carla had shoved me at that table. For a moment, I lay still, staring at the ceiling and letting the feelings settle. This was not just family tension anymore. This was paperwork that could ruin my future. I got up, poured coffee into my favorite mug, and stared at the folder on my desktop labeled Harbor Ridge Personal. Every piece of evidence sat inside, waiting to be turned into something stronger. By 9, I had scheduled an appointment with an estate and trust attorney, whose reviews described her as direct experienced and allergic to unnecessary drama. That was exactly what I needed. Her name was Elena Cross. She was in her mid-50s with short silver-streaked hair and a calm presence that felt like walking into a courtroom before anyone else arrived. No theatrics, just clarity. She shook my hand and gestured for me to sit across from her desk, which was covered with neatly stacked files and sticky notes in precise rows. I explained what happened at Thanksgiving and how I discovered the inconsistencies in the documents. I slid my printed timeline across the desk with the photos clipped behind it. Elena did not interrupt. She read slowly, her expression steady, but her eyes sharp. When she reached the amendment's date, she paused. Then she looked at me over the frames of her glasses. If this was signed after your grandfather passed that, alone is grounds for contesting. And if the notary records do not match the claimed location, it becomes even stronger. Her tone stayed even, but there was a firmness underneath it. Carla was not just being unfair. She was edging into legal misconduct. Elena tapped the notary stamp image with her pen. Bellevue and Tacoma are not interchangeable. If she wanted to fake this, she should have chosen a closer city. I felt something uncurl inside my chest, a mix of relief and adrenaline. Someone with authority finally confirmed what my instincts already screamed. Then Elena leaned back and said a sentence that would ring in my ears long after I left her office. This is what we call a classic second wife move. That phrase hit with the weight of cultural familiarity, the kind people in their 50s and 60s understand immediately. It was not meant cruelly. It was simply blunt truth. Some spouses tried to redirect wealth quietly after an elder passes, especially when one child looks easier to push aside. I wondered briefly how many times Elena had seen situations like mine. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Then her expression softened as she flipped to the timeline I created. Most clients do not come in with a full chronology and cross-check notary logs, she said. Her tone held genuine respect. You did half of my work already. It startled me more than it should have. Being recognized for my brain power, my attention to detail, my discipline with numbers, was normal at work, but rare everywhere else. Hearing a seasoned attorney say it so plainly hit something old in me, something that had been pushed down by years of being labeled the one who did not need anything. Elena continued walking me through what the law would see. If I contested successfully, the entire $2 million trust would remain intact under the original beneficiary designation. And more importantly, Carla might face real consequences if she knowingly presented a falsified amendment. This was not drama. This was statute. She explained trustee duties and timelines. She mentioned that Washington state allows challenges within specific windows, and that mine was well within range. She clarified how notary discrepancies raise suspicion quickly. She did not embellish anything, and she did not overpromise. She spoke like someone who had to clean up many financial messes caused by people who thought they were clever. When she finished, she folded her hands. "So here is what we can do. If you want representation, we can sign a retainer today. From there, I can prepare a demand letter to send to Carla and to whoever manages the trust. That will freeze any further attempts to alter or access funds until this is resolved." The folder on my lap felt heavier, but also safer. I nodded slowly. Yes, I want that. She slid the retainer agreement forward. Her pen waited on the signature line. As I signed my name, I felt something shift in the air around me, the same sensation I get right before announcing findings in a major deal evaluation. It was the moment where gathering evidence becomes taking action. When it was done, Elena gave me a small, reassuring nod. "You are not being greedy, Blair. You are stopping someone from stealing from you." The words hit deeper than I expected. My throat tightened and I had to take a slow breath. I had not realized how badly I needed someone to say that out loud. She stood and walked me to the door. "One more thing," she said, "and this is important. Do not confront them yet. Wait until they call a family meeting. They always do. That is where the truth will matter most." Then her final line landed with the gravity of a judge's gavel. "Next time they say, 'We are family, we can handle this privately, you agree,' but not in the way they think." I walked out of her office feeling lighter than I had in days, yet sharper, more focused. The Seattle air outside felt colder and cleaner against my skin. Carla had thrown the first shove, but now I had someone who knew how to move pieces on a board she did not even understand. And for the first time, the unfairness did not feel like a weight. It felt like fuel. Leaving Elena's office did not end the storm in my mind. If anything, it stirred up memories I had spent years pushing into quiet corners. As I walked back to my apartment, the past returned piece by piece, not in dramatic waves, but in small moments of dismissal and financial favoritism that built the foundation for what Carla was doing now. The truth was, this pattern had been shaping my life long before $2 million entered the picture. I remembered being 17 in the kitchen, listening to Dad explain why my college fund was smaller than I expected. He had said it gently, as if delivering good news. "You are responsible, Blair. You will get scholarships. You always figure things out. Madison needs the cushion more." I nodded like I understood, but the words left a bruise. At that age, you want to believe adults are fair, but fairness in our house had rules only Carla knew how to write. When I applied for tuition support, the fund I thought I had was suddenly gone used for something I was never told. Years later, I would understand what that something likely was. At 19, I watched Dad and Carla pay off Madison's credit card balance because she was stressed and needed a clean slate before her next attempt at finding herself. She had maxed out her card on a clothing subscription and a short-lived photography course. I was working 2 part-time jobs and tutoring statistics to cover books and living costs. Carla had smiled at me over the dining table and said, "Be proud you do not need our help. You are the responsible one." I swallowed the sting and went back to my laptop. Every year the message hardened. Responsible meant invisible. Strong meant self-funded. Capable meant unworthy of financial consideration. Over time, that framing became part of our family's vocabulary. It showed up in conversations, at gatherings, and little jokes in the way they talked about me when they thought they were praising me. It was at a family barbecue on a warm July day that Carla announced to a group of relatives, "Blair is the brain. Madison is the heart." She said it like she was offering balance, like we each held value. But the way she said it built a wall around me. Being the brain meant being the one who could be set aside because brains do not need support. Hearts apparently do. People nodded politely as if they understood something profound. I smiled too because I had learned to accept roles assigned to me regardless of the fit. But later that night, as I washed dishes, I realized the phrase was not a compliment. It was a cage. In college, I took extra shifts at the tutoring center, sometimes staying until midnight working through equations with nursing students who hated math. Every paycheck mattered. By 24, I paid off my student loans almost 10 years earlier than the schedule. I did it through disciplined savings and early investments in index funds after watching the market climbs inside my real estate job. But I never told my family. Not once. My achievement would not have been celebrated. It would have been repurposed as proof that I did not need anything from them. A few random memories sharpened as I made tea that evening and sat on my sofa reviewing everything. Carla signing a school permission slip for Madison because Dad was not home. Her handwriting trying to match his, but not quite. To a kid, it looked harmless, but now I saw it differently. It had not been about convenience. It had been practice. Signing on his behalf because it was faster, easier, less bother. Later, when taxes or refinancing forms appeared, Dad often let her handle them because she was organized. I recalled watching her fill forms while he hovered uncertainly, and she would wave him off with a quick, "I know what I am doing." She liked control. She liked paperwork. The trust amendment was simply the biggest stage for a pattern she had perfected over years. Another memory surfaced from a conversation last year. We were sitting at the kitchen island drinking iced coffee when Carla mentioned the trust briefly. She said, "You do not have kids, Blair. You do not need as much as Madison." I remember how casually she said it and how my throat tightened in a way I could not explain. It was not about children. It was about worth, measured by dependency, measured by her perception of who deserved help. That sentence echoed through every choice she made, including the attempt to move the trust. I sipped my tea and stared at the ceiling, trying to line up all the memories like puzzle pieces. The college fund disappearing, the early signs of forged signatures, the financial bailouts for Madison, the moral arguments claiming I was too strong to need support, the steady framing of me as someone who could and should be denied because I would land on my feet. These were not separate events. They were stepping stones leading to the moment she slammed into me at Thanksgiving and tried to rip $2 million out of my hands. And for the first time, I re-examined those memories not through the lens of the quiet daughter who accepted them, but through the new clarity Elena had given me. If amendment documents could be faked, what else had been signed without my father understanding? How many times had he been nudged toward decisions that benefited Carla and Madison at my expense? It was not only anger that rose inside me. It was a sense of obligation, a feeling that I might be the only one capable of recognizing the signs and protecting him from something he did not have the experience to catch. As the night deepened, I whispered the truth aloud. This is not just about $2 million. This is my line, the final one. And I knew that once crossed, there would be no returning to the version of myself that stayed small and quiet for the sake of family peace. Carla was the one who called it a family meeting, as if a title could soften what she was about to try to do. She left me a voicemail and a message that said, "We should all sit down and clarify the trust before things are finalized." Her tone was light, almost cheerful, as if this was about holiday plans and not about $2 million and a forged amendment. A week later, I drove back to Bellevue with my laptop bag on the passenger seat and a neat stack of papers in the back. Elena had helped me print everything I needed. The original trust she had pulled from the firm that drafted it, The amendment copy Carla had waved around, the notary registry log, the death certificate showing the exact date and time my grandfather passed, my own timeline with dates, times, and citations. I was not coming as the kid at the table anymore. I was coming as the only person in that house who actually understood what the documents meant. When I walked into the living room, the furniture had been rearranged. The coffee table was pushed to the side, and the dining chairs from the kitchen were set in a circle, like some kind of intervention. Carla sat near the head of the cluster with a file folder in her lap. Madison lounged beside her in a blazer that tried very hard to look professional. My father, David, sat opposite them, looking tired lines etched deeper around his mouth. Next to him was a man I did not know in a suit, with a slim briefcase at his feet. "This is Tom," she said quickly when she saw me looking. "He is just here as a friend to help us think through the options." He gave me a polite nod, the kind that says, "I am neutral," but my chair placement says otherwise. I set my laptop bag down on the sideboard and gave Dad a small nod. He would not quite meet my eyes. Carla cleared her throat and folded her hands on top of the folder, just like I knew she would. "We do not want any resentment," she began, in that righteous tone she saved for moments when she wanted everyone else to feel unreasonable. "We are doing what is best for everyone." She gave me a soft smile that did not reach her eyes. "Blair, you are the smart one. You of all people should understand numbers do not lie." The sentence landed exactly the way she intended, a compliment sharpened into a reprimand. Smart girls accept being cut out because they understand the math. I sat down in the only remaining chair and let the silence stretch a second longer than was comfortable. Then I opened my laptop and clicked the small cable into the side of the television. I had asked Dad ahead of time if I could use it for a presentation about work. That had not been a lie. It just was not about his work. The screen lit up with the first slide, my grandfather's name across the top, the original trust date at the bottom. Before Carla could redirect the conversation, I spoke. "Since we are talking about what is best for everyone," I said, "I think it is important that everyone here understands what we are actually dealing with. Not stories, not assumptions, just facts." Carla shifted in her seat but kept smiling. "Of course, honey. Facts are good. Go ahead." I clicked to the next slide. On one side of the screen was the death certificate. On the other, the amendment date blown up large enough that even someone at the back of the room could read it. Underneath, I had written one simple line. Amendment dated 2 weeks after date of death. The room went quiet so fast it felt like the air dropped. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the television. Tom, the advisor, frowned and glanced at Carla. Madison crossed her arms tighter. I let them sit with the dates for a moment before I spoke again. "This amendment you have been waving around was supposedly signed 2 weeks after Grandpa died, which is interesting because that would make it physically impossible for him to sign anything. Numbers do not lie, remember." My voice stayed steady, almost too calm. I clicked to the next slide. A screenshot of the notary registry entry filled the screen. The name, the registration number, the logged location. Tacoma. I pointed with the small remote. And here we have the notary information. The stamp on the amendment says it was signed at the house in Bellevue, but the notary log shows that on that date, this notary was working appointments in Tacoma only. No visit recorded here, no signature in this county. More silence, the kind that wraps around people's throats. Dad finally looked directly at Carla, and I watched something crumble in his expression. Tom shifted again, clearly recalculating his position in this little circle. Carla's smile had vanished. Her fingers tightened on the folder in her lap. "Blair, this is getting unnecessarily technical," she tried. "We are just trying to honor what your grandfather would have wanted. He would have wanted Madison to have a shot at keeping her business." I shook my head. "No. What he wanted is written in the original trust, the one drafted before he was sick, before anyone had a reason to rush papers in front of him." I clicked again. The screen now showed a side-by-side comparison of the beneficiary designation. On the left, the amendment with Madison's name highlighted. On the right, the original document with my name underlined next to the words, primary beneficiary. I took a breath. Here's what the law sees, I said clearly. If this amendment is invalid and every piece of evidence points that way, then the entire $2 million trust stays exactly as it was. It does not get split. It does not get reimagined. It belongs to me under the original terms. I watched that land. For the first time in this entire saga, they were forced to confront the fact that I was not begging for scraps. I was enforcing what already existed. Carla opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. One more thing. My attorney is prepared to file if we do not respect Grandpa's written intent today. She's already drafted a petition to contest the amendment and to notify the trustee and the bank. They know my name now. They know this amendment is under review. Tom turned to Carla sharply at the word attorney. You did not tell me she already had counsel, he muttered. David rubbed his forehead and finally spoke, his voice, smaller than I remembered from my childhood. Carla, is this true? He asked quietly. Was the paper signed after Dad died? She bristled. It is just paperwork, David. Everyone understands what he meant in his heart. Blair is fine. She has her job. She does not need this the way Madison does. That is what Carla did best. Turn fairness into selfishness and theft into moral duty. I kept my eyes on my father. This is not about who needs it more. This is about fiduciary duty. Grandpa trusted you as trustee. That means you had a legal obligation to protect his wishes, not reinterpret them to avoid conflict at home. If you sign anything that contradicts his clear instructions, especially after he died, you are not honoring him. You are exposing yourself. His shoulders sagged. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Carla snapped, then the smooth veneer cracking in front of all of us. Oh, do not start lecturing us on duty, she snapped. You blew in from Seattle with your spreadsheets and think you know everything. You are trying to steal from your own sister. There it was, the real face, not the gentle stepmother tone, the edge underneath. I let her words hang in the air and then answered softly, Numbers do not lie, remember. You said that yourself. The dates, the notary, the original trust, those are the numbers. I did not create them. I am just refusing to pretend they say something they do not. Madison finally spoke up, her voice tight. So what now? You just take all of it and leave us with nothing. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed even. What happens next depends on whether we choose to respect a legal document or whether we force a court to remind us what it means. I looked straight at Carla. I do not want to see my stepmother in court, but I also will not accept being shoved out of my chair over my own money anymore. The room stayed frozen. For the first time, every person there understood that this was no longer a moral debate they could win by calling me selfish. It was a legal line they could not cross without bleeding. And the question now was simple. How far were they willing to push? The day after the meeting in Bellevue, Elena sent out the letters we had discussed as calmly as if she were approving a routine filing. One went to the trustee named in the original Harbor Ridge documents, one to the bank that held the assets. They were short and precise and left no room for interpretation. The amendment was being contested on the basis of timing and notary discrepancies, and until the matter was resolved, any attempt to modify or distribute funds from the trust needed to stop. By the end of the week, the freeze was in place. Elena forwarded me the confirmations. The trustee acknowledged receipt and noted that all activity connected to the disputed amendment was on hold. The bank replied in the clipped professional language that I knew so well from my own line of work. Pending review, no transfers, reallocations, or beneficiary changes would be honored. On paper, it looked dry and procedural. In their lives, it was an earthquake. I heard about the first cracks through a text from a cousin who still lived near my father. Apparently, Madison had tried to pull a substantial amount from the trust after our meeting, telling her lender that money was coming. When it did not arrive, the lender called the trustee instead of calling her and learned what Elena had put in motion. From there, things started to unravel. Madison had built her latest business on top of a promise she was never actually given. Without the $2 million infusion she had been counting on, the numbers did not work. Orders slowed, suppliers wanted payment up front, and the bills she had been deferring showed up with red stamps and stiffer language. I did not celebrate. I did not even smile. I just let out a breath I had been holding ever since Carla slammed into me at that table. Justice does not always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it just feels like weight, moving to where it always should have been. The first direct reaction I got came from Carla herself. My phone lit up with her name late one afternoon when I was closing out a model at work. I stared at the screen for a moment, then answered because I knew avoiding this conversation would not stop it. Her voice came in sharp and tight without any of the soft edges she used on my father. "You are tearing this family apart over money," she snapped. There was no hello, no "are you free," just accusation. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the gray Seattle sky. "No," I said slowly. "I am refusing to let you tear it apart quietly by taking what does not belong to you. You have lawyers now," she pushed. "You froze the trust. Do you have any idea what you are doing to us? To Madison?" I thought of the way her shoulder had driven into mine, the way the file folder had cracked across the back of my hand, while she told me I did not need a trust because I had a job. My shoulder ached faintly just remembering. "I am very aware of what I am doing," I answered. "I investigated the trust and I looked at some other things too." There was a pause on the line, a tiny hitch of breath. "Other things." Her voice dropped half a notch. I kept my tone even. Old withdrawals, transfers, times when money that was supposed to have one purpose went somewhere else. If I put it all together, I probably have enough to make a much bigger problem than the one we are talking about now. The point is, I am choosing not to. That is the only mercy in this conversation. I let that sink in. I wanted her to understand that my restraint was not weakness. It was a decision. "That is blackmail," she hissed. "No," I said. "That is a warning. If you keep pushing, I will stop limiting this to a civil dispute over one trust." She went quiet long enough that I could hear the faint hum of her refrigerator in the background. When she spoke again, her voice was coated in hurt. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. He trusted us to take care of everyone. You are the one turning this into a war." My hand tightened on the phone. "Grandpa trusted you to follow what he signed," I said, "and he trusted me to understand numbers. The only thing I am doing is finally acting like the granddaughter he raised instead of the convenient child you decided I should be." She hung up without saying goodbye. A day later, Elena called with another update. The bank had taken a closer look at the house in Bellevue. Years of refinancing and pulling equity to float Madison's projects had pushed their line of credit to the edge. Without the incoming trust funds, the ratios no longer looked safe. The bank had sent a formal notice. The line of credit was being capped, and parts of it would be called back according to the terms they had agreed to when they signed. Limited income rising debt, no reliable cash flow from the business anymore. The house was no longer the comfortable staging ground Carla used for her authority. It was becoming leverage that could lean the wrong way. On the business side, it was not much better. A small commercial bank that had extended Madison a loan based on projected revenue received word that the trust money was frozen. The manager reevaluated their exposure and tightened terms. Payments she had thought she could juggle suddenly demanded real dates and real dollars. For the first time in a long time, the women who had always insisted I would land on my feet were learning what it felt like when the floor started moving under them. Elena asked if I wanted to explore criminal angles. The word alone made my stomach knot. "We could," she said calmly. "Forged signatures, misused authority, false statements to financial institutions. There is a case to be made if you want to make it." I thought of my father trapped between his wife and his daughter with a house on the line and guilt already pulling him in two directions. Part of me wanted to scorch the earth. Another part recognized that burning everything would not feel like healing. I took a slow breath. No, not if I can avoid it. I just want the trust protected and my grandfather's wishes honored. I want something in writing that keeps them away from it. Elena nodded. Then we will focus on that. She drafted an agreement that did exactly what I needed, and nothing more. Carla and Madison would acknowledge in writing that they had no legal claim to the Harbor Ridge Trust. They would agree not to represent themselves as beneficiaries or decision-makers to any bank advisor or family member. Any attempt to do so could be used against them if litigation became necessary later. It was a line in ink that matched the line I had already drawn in my mind. They stalled at first, but the mounting pressure from the bank and the trustee left them with few options. Eventually, Elena forwarded me a scanned copy with both their signatures. No amendments, no side deals. Just a simple boundary written in legal language that even Carla could not spin in her favor. I did not pop champagne. I did not post a triumphant update anywhere. I closed the email, sat on my sofa, and noticed how my shoulder still twinged when I shifted a certain way. My hand remembered the sharp edge of that file folder. My body held the memory of being shoved out of my own place at the table, even as the documents finally acknowledged that the seat had been mine all along. What hurt the most was not Carla. It was my father. He called one evening, sounding thinner than his voice had any right to be. I heard about the agreement, he said quietly. I am trying to understand how we got here. We got here because you signed things you did not read, I replied before I could soften it. There was a long silence. Finally, he sighed. Dad should have protected you, he said. His voice broke on the word. I should have protected you. I closed my eyes. I know, I said. It was the closest thing either of us had to forgiveness in that moment. Time would decide the rest. For a while, things went quiet. The trust sat frozen in its proper form. The house in Bellevue carried more debt than comfort. Madison's business limped on under the weight of loans and broken promises. From the outside, it might have looked like the story was over. The guilty had been checked. The assets were safe. The law had done its work. But people like Carla do not surrender easily. Silence for her was never acceptance. It was calculation. And even as I tried to focus on work and on building something steadier for myself, I could feel it, that prickle at the back of my neck that says the next move is already forming in someone else's mind. I just did not know yet that the move would be a knock on my own front door with an entire delegation standing behind her. I noticed them before they even knocked, because the hallway outside my apartment carried sounds differently. Footsteps on this floor traveled through the walls in a soft, hollow way that always told me when my parcels arrived or when my elderly neighbor down the hall was coming home from her daily walk. But this pattern was different. 3 sets of footsteps, uneven, hesitant, heavy in a way that suggested people who did not want to be where they were but felt forced to show up anyway. When I opened the door, I saw all of them standing there. Carla at the front, but not in her usual armor. No bold jewelry, no ironed blazer, no curated perfection. Her hair looked unstyled, her eyes tired and puffy, in a way that said she had not been sleeping well. Madison stood slightly behind her, wearing a hoodie that sagged at the sleeves and shoes that had seen better days. David hovered off to the side as if unsure whether he was allowed to speak or whether doing so would make everything worse. It took me half a second to register the contrast between them and my own living space behind me. My apartment was not extravagant. It was a 1-bedroom near Lake Union with tall windows and a view of water that always calmed me near sunset. Everything inside was intentional and tidy. A small bookshelf arranged by color, a minimalist kitchen counter, a pot of rosemary by the window that I tended when I needed to think. I lived simply but with control. They arrived looking like people who had lost theirs. Carla tried to smile, but the expression cracked almost instantly. "Hi, Blair," she said, sliding into a tone so soft it almost felt like an impersonation. "Could we talk for a moment?" I stepped back enough to let them inside because denying them at the door would create a different kind of conflict I was not ready for. They entered slowly, taking in the space as if expecting signs of extravagance that would justify whatever story they had built about me. Instead, they found a clean apartment, smelling faintly of coffee and lemon oil. No luxury. No evidence of the $2 million they once believed I would shrug off. Just a life built with intention, not entitlement. Carla seated herself at the small dining table without asking. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. "We are in trouble, Blair," she began, almost whispering. "The house, the loans, the bank is threatening action, and Madison." She glanced at her daughter, who looked like someone who had cried in the car. Madison might have to declare bankruptcy. Bankruptcy. She said it with the dramatic weight of a medical diagnosis. Then she leaned forward, adopting that trembling tone designed to place her in the victim role. "You do not want that for your sister, do you?" The word sister landed with the dull thud of manipulation. I sat across from them, keeping my posture steady. The distance between us felt symbolic. Carla folded her hands and kept talking. "We know things have been tense. We know the trust situation got messy, but we are family. Family helps each other. If you would just consider sharing a portion of the $2 million, we could stabilize everything and pay you back." It took effort not to exhale in disbelief. Even standing in financial wreckage, they went straight to entitlement as if the $2 million existed to save them from their own choices. I let a long, quiet moment settle before I answered. "Carla," I said, "I think you misunderstand something important. I do not live off that trust. I never have." She blinked, confused. I continued. "I have a stake in a real estate investment project through the fund I work for. It vests over time. It is not huge yet, but it means I am not depending on any inheritance. My personal net worth is already over 7 figures. I said it in a plain, neutral tone, like stating the weather. No bragging, no triumph, just fact. Carla stared at me, stunned, not because she admired it, but because it dismantled the lie she had always used to justify taking from me. That I was young, that I was independent enough not to need anything, that taking from me caused no harm. Her mouth opened and closed. When she finally spoke, her voice shook with disbelief. "Why did you never say anything?" "Because I never owed you proof that I could take care of myself," I replied. "And because telling you would not have changed how you treated me." Carla tried regrouping, shifting tactics like someone moving pieces on a board that no longer made sense. "We are not asking for everything, Blair. Just a loan. Something small from the trust. A bridge until things stabilize." She waited for sympathy. I reached for the folder I had left on the counter earlier in the week. It contained the agreement Elena drafted and all the trust documents they had signed. I placed it gently on the table and opened to the page that mattered. "This is the agreement you signed," I said clearly. Elena made sure it was airtight. "You acknowledged you have no legal claim to the trust, and you agreed not to request or represent yourselves as beneficiaries in any context. Any attempt to move or borrow from those funds can be considered a breach. It can be used against you in court." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The words did the work. Madison wiped her nose with her sleeve. Carla looked blindsided, not by the legality, but by the fact that her usual arsenal of guilt and pressure was not working. "Blair," she murmured, "please. You know we did not mean for things to become so hostile." I kept my gaze level. "When you slammed into me at that table, I said you did not just bruise my shoulder. You proved exactly how little you thought of me." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to settle into the walls. Even David looked pained. Carla shook her head as if trying to rewrite the memory. That was a misunderstanding. Everything got intense. "You know how holidays are." I cut her off gently but firmly. "No, I know exactly what it was. And that moment is why I cannot and will not save you from consequences you created." Carla's eyes filled, but I had stopped confusing tears with truth years ago. I stood signaling the conversation was over. "If Dad wants to visit me," I said calmly, "my door is open to him. But the trust is not. Not now. Not ever. That is the boundary." Carla rose slowly as though the air had thickened. Madison stood behind her shoulders, slumped. David hesitated, turning toward me with an expression so tired it almost hurt to see. I gave him a small nod to show he was not shut out like the others. They filed out one by one. The hallway absorbed their retreating footsteps until everything went still again. I closed the door gently. Not in anger, in closure. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt the boundaries settle into place, not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally. A clean line, a necessary one. And I knew, while the trust was now safe, the question that lingered was something far more complicated. What would remain of my relationship with my father after this? 3 days after the confrontation in my apartment, I heard a single knock on my door. Not 3 knocks like the day Carla and Madison arrived, but one. Soft, uncertain. The kind a person uses when they hope the door will open, but also fear the person on the other side might not want to see them. When I opened it, David stood there alone. No Carla, no Madison, no emotional entourage. Just my father holding the brim of his cap in both hands as if he were bracing against wind that only he could feel. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with regret. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around my living room like someone entering a museum of a life they had not taken the time to study before now. He sat at the table where Carla had made her plea days earlier, but instead of entitlement or expectation, his shoulders carried remorse. "Blair," he began, and his voice broke on my name. "I owe you an apology." For a long moment, he kept his eyes on the table, as if ashamed to look at me directly. I sat across from him, letting the silence settle, without rescuing him from it. He finally continued, "I should have stopped her that night. I should have stepped in. I saw the way you stumbled when she hit you. I saw your face, and I still let her take over the conversation. I do not know what kind of father that made me." The admission felt heavy and raw. He scrubbed his hand over his jaw, then finally met my eyes. "Truth is, Blair, I have been letting Carla make decisions for years because I thought it kept the peace. And because she always said you were fine, you would be okay. You were like me," she said, "always landing on your feet." Again, he shook his head. I realize now that was not a compliment. It was an excuse. It was permission for her to take advantage of you. The pain in his voice was not performative. It was slow and tired, like someone sorting through a long history of moments they wished they could rewrite. I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness yet, but recognition of a man trying to step out of the shadow of choices he had allowed to happen. I took a breath and made a decision. "Dad," I said, "there is something I want to show you." I stood and retrieved a small leather notebook from my desk. Nothing flashy, just a simple binder I kept for my own clarity. Inside were summaries of my investment portfolio, my emergency fund, my projected income from the property share that would vest in the coming years, and a list of goals I had set when I was 21 to pay off my student loans and build independence early. I placed it in front of him and gently opened to the page that summarized everything in numbers, not emotions. He read silently, his eyes scanning line after line. When he looked up, his expression had changed. "You did all this," he whispered, "on your own." I nodded. "I never needed the trust to survive, Dad. I needed you to believe that I deserved to be treated fairly. I needed you to see me." He closed the binder slowly, as if sealing a truth he had ignored for too long. Then he said quietly, "I see you now." It was not a dramatic line, not a movie moment, but it was real. A small mending thread pulling an old wound a little closer to healing. I leaned back, letting the moment breathe before telling him the rest. "I have decided something about the trust," I said. "Not the part about ownership. That is settled. But what it will mean? His brow furrowed slightly. I continued. I am setting aside a portion of the annual returns to create a small scholarship, in Grandpa's name, for students who don't have family to back them up. His eyes softened. That is what he would have wanted, he murmured. I think so. Silence drifted between us again, but this time it was gentler. Dad eventually asked the question I knew was coming. What happens now? With us? With the family? I kept my tone steady. You can visit me any time. You do not need permission or an excuse. But that boundary does not extend to Carla or Madison. My life needs to be quiet, safe, free of people who see me as a resource instead of a person. He nodded slowly as though absorbing the boundary not as punishment, but as structure. Fair, he said softly. More than fair. He stood after a moment, hesitation lingering in his posture. Before leaving, he touched my shoulder gently, the opposite of the bruise I had been given at Thanksgiving. I am proud of you, Blair. I always was. I just did a poor job of showing it. When he left the apartment, the air felt clearer. The tension that had lived in my chest for weeks loosened its grip. Setting boundaries did not feel like pushing him away. It felt like opening a door correctly this time. After he left, I sat at my desk to breathe, and my laptop chimed with a new email from the senior partner at my firm. The subject line read, "Promotion Discussion." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling something warm rise in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just the quiet truth that when you finally step out of someone's reach, your life starts expanding in ways it was waiting to all along. The promotion became official a month later on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with my coffee steaming on the counter and fog still hanging low over Lake Union outside my windows, soft and gray and calm, in a way that matched how my life finally felt inside. My supervisor called me into a small conference room, shut the door, and slid a printed letter across the table, but I already knew what it was from the way he smiled. Senior data analyst with a compensation bump that made my spreadsheets and future projections tilt upward in a way I had once only modeled for other people's deals. I walked back to my desk with the letter in my hand and noticed something had shifted in how I moved through the office. It was not just the new title. It was the quiet certainty that my future no longer sat in anybody else's hands, not in Carla's, not in Madison's, and not in whatever story they told themselves about who deserved what. The trust remained intact and undisputed. The Harbor Ridge portfolio stayed exactly where it was supposed to be, under the neutral eyes of a professional advisor Elena recommended with me as the sole beneficiary, according to my grandfather's original wishes. We invested conservatively, favoring stable municipal bonds, keeping the little lakeside property well-maintained and rented, letting the cash account act as a cushion rather than a temptation. The statements arrived like clockwork, steady numbers marching in predictable rows, a quiet background hum of security instead of the high drama that had once surrounded every conversation about those funds. Carla and Madison still had their own choices to manage, but they no longer involved my assets. News about them came in fragments and sideways comments rather than direct updates. A former neighbor texted me one afternoon with a link to a real estate listing, and there it was, in glossy photos and sterile language. The Bellevue house staged and spotless described as a motivated sale, with phrases like tremendous potential and bring your offers that anyone in my line of work knew meant one thing. They needed out. Sometime after that, I heard through David during one of his quieter visits that Madison had shuttered her business entirely. The line of credit had been called. Suppliers had stopped extending terms. The carefully curated image of the struggling visionary entrepreneur had collided with basic arithmetic. I did not feel triumphant when I heard it. I did not save the listing or forward it to anyone with a smug caption. Instead, I felt the calm recognition that this was exactly what happens when you spend years treating money like a story instead of a responsibility. It was not karma. It was consequence. while their lives contracted in all the places they had overextended, mine expanded in small, deliberate ways. I finally booked a weekend trip with a friend without having to ask anyone's opinion about whether it was practical. I upgraded my laptop because I wanted to, not because it was the cheapest option. I bought a second-hand kayak and started taking it out on the lake early on Sundays when the water was still and the city had not fully woken up. My net worth crossed a threshold I had once only dreamed about when I was 20, and punching numbers into a budgeting app at my tiny student desk. Between my salary, my stake in the fund's project, and the careful growth of the trust, I knew with certainty that my financial footing had passed 7 figures and was no longer something fragile that could be wrecked by someone else's signature. But the real power was not the number itself. It was the fact that I no longer allowed anyone to knock me out of my seat, literally or figuratively, just because they felt more entitled to my place at the table. The scholarship came to life quietly, not as some public announcement, but as a document signed in a neat conference room naming it the Harbor Ridge Scholarship in my grandfather's honor. We structured it to support students who had the grades and grit, but no family backing the kind of kids who were told to be proud they did not need help, while their more chaotic siblings soaked up every bailout in sight. The first semester, we awarded only one scholarship, a modest amount compared to the size of the trust, but enough to cover a gap that would have forced someone to drop a class or work a second job. A month later, an email landed in my inbox. From the first recipient, a young woman studying engineering at a state school. She wrote about working nights at a diner, about being the first in her family to go to college, about the moment she opened her award letter and realized she could say yes to an unpaid internship that would actually move her forward instead of clocking extra shifts just to keep the lights on. She did not know who I was. She did not know the porch scene or the bruise on my shoulder or the way a trust had nearly been turned into a weapon against me. She only knew that money appeared at the right time with no strings attached and changed the slope of her semester. Reading her message, I felt something that no courtroom victory or shouting match could have given me. Justice that did not look like revenge, just a quiet correction of direction. One evening not long after that, I sat on my small balcony overlooking Lake Union, wrapped in a sweater against the chill wind coming off the water. The city glowed low and gold around the shoreline boats, moving like slow thoughts across the surface. My shoulder no longer hurt when I lifted my arm. The bruise had faded weeks ago, leaving only a faint memory that now felt like part of a different life. I thought about Thanksgiving, about the jolt of Carla's body slamming into mine, about the sound of the folder cracking against the back of my hand, about how hot my face had burned as everyone watched. I thought about the fear I had felt the first time I opened the photos of the trust documents and realized something was wrong, the way my heart had pounded when I stepped into Elena's office, the steady courage it had taken to speak plainly at the family meeting in Bellevue. Then I thought about now, the quiet of my apartment, the steady hum of my work, the slow, steady growth of investments that belonged solely to me, the little scholarship putting down its first fragile roots in other people's lives. I was not happy because Carla and Madison had been forced to sell the house or because their business had failed. Their hardship did not nourish me. What made me truly content was knowing that my money and my future now sat in the hands of the one person who had proven she respected both. Me. Sometimes justice is not about watching the people who hurt you suffer. It is about finally stepping out of their reach and building something that does not require their approval at all. If you have ever been knocked out of your seat in your own family or at work or when it came to money, if you have ever been told to be grateful with less because you seem like the strong one, tell me one line about your story in the comments. Maybe the next story I tell will sound a little like yours.